Trwa 11. Kongres Polskiej Izby Ubezpieczeń. Witam Państwa bardzo serdecznie ponownie po przerwie na lunch. Witam w popołudniowej części naszego spotkania i zapraszam na kolejny panel kongresu, tym razem poświęcony kluczowym dla rynku kwestiom, w jakim momencie cyklu regulacyjnego znajdujemy się w Polsce, a w jakim w Europie. Taki tytuł nosi ta debata, która prowadzona będzie w języku angielskim, dlatego przypominam o możliwości zaopatrzenia się w zestaw słuchawkowy, dlatego że cała debata oczywiście będzie prowadzona w języku angielskim, ale tłumaczona na język polski. A już teraz z ogromną przyjemnością zapraszam na scenę prowadzącą ten panel panią Coleman, redaktorkę EU News Radio, oraz panelistów panią Petrę Hielkema, przewodniczącą European Insurance and Occupational Pensions Authority, pana doktora habilitowanego Jacka Jastrzębskiego, profesora Uniwersytetu Warszawskiego, przewodniczącego Komisji Nadzoru Finansowego oraz pana Didier Millerota, kierownika działu Ubezpieczeń i emerytur Komisji Europejskiej. Zapraszam wszystkich Państwa. Welcome to the stage. And Karen, now the floor is yours. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Agatha. Thank you. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's lovely to be joined by so many of you again. You've come in from the beautiful sunshine here in gorgeous Sopot. My name, as Agatha said, is Karen Coleman. I'm a journalist and a broadcaster from Ireland. I'm the editor of EU News Radio, which reports on EU news for the Irish media, and I've been specialising in EU issues for a long, long time, both from the European Parliament's perspective and the European Commission's. And as I said, it's wonderful to have you all here because we are going to talk about a very important topic, which is at what point in the regulatory cycle is Poland and the rest of Europe. This panel discussion will be conducted in English, so if you do need translations, please grab your headset now and you will be able to hear the proceedings. So during this panel discussion, we're going to explore in more detail the changes that the Capital Markets Union is going to bring. We're going to look at the issue of regulation. We've already heard earlier today how the dangers of over-regulation are a major concern. We also want to explore what European supervision is going to look like and what role national supervision will play and how those changes are going to impact on Europe's competitiveness. And finally, we're going to touch on climate change and the green transition, and of course their implications for the insurance industry. So it's going to be a very busy session, and I am delighted to be joined again on stage. You were already on stage earlier by Didier Millerot, head of the Insurance and Pensions Unit at the European Commission, Petra Hielkema, president of the European Insurance and Occupational Pensions Authority, EIOPA, and finally, and I have been practicing your name, Professor, so I really, really hope I have got it right, Jacek Jastrzębski. Is that good? Okay, thank you very much. I got help from your colleagues last night at the pronunciation.
Just wanted to say that's me.
Yes,
that's me.
Yes, so it is the correct pronunciation.
Nearly perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to start by putting a general question to all of you, and it's going to focus on the concerns of over-regulation of insurance activities, because again, as I said this morning, you heard about that, and indeed, in the words of Andreas Brandstetter, the head of Insurance Europe regulation, he says, is taking away our oxygen. So I'll go to you first, Didier. Is that a fair assessment? Are those concerns about over-regulation over-exaggerated, or do you think it is a justified complaint from those such as our many colleagues here in the insurance industry?
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Yes, we go directly in the heart of the matter. So, yes. Is there overregulation? Probably the answer is, as always, has to be balanced, but it's true, and I have to acknowledge it as a representative of the Commission today, that the past years have seen an accumulation of rules, both from a horizontal perspective and a vertical perspective. So on the vertical side, we had the Solvency II review, so not a revolution, but nevertheless a lot of changes in the framework. And as I said this morning, we have not done the job yet. There still is a level 2, so implementing measures to be adopted in the years and the months to come. So there's a lot there, but more and more you see also horizontal legislation which apply to the insurance sector, which is, by the way, as well a token of the importance and relevance of the sector, because it means that it has a role to play in many different fields, and it is relevant, as I said this morning, in areas where the political priorities lie, like fight against climate change, digital transformation. But nevertheless, this comes with the cost of having to comply with new sets of rules. There's been a lot of rules in the area of sustainable finance, the taxonomy, the obligations to produce transition plans and so on, which have been added to the already existing requirements. And as was mentioned as well this morning in the area of digital transformation, new rules to be able to withstand cybersecurity risks, new rules are coming in terms of establishment of a data-driven market. But you should also see, I would say, the bright side of the street, which is the fact that, again, it means that the sector is relevant, and second, that it has opportunities to develop in new areas, in new sector, contribute to the common good. So we have to balance that. But we, as regulator, need to be aware of that concern. And for the next steps, the next Commission, I think there will be a need to take a breath, consolidate everything, and make sure things work in practice. But I think we'll come back to that.
We are going to come back to that. Perhaps, Petra, I can go to you then. Is regulation sucking the oxygen out of the insurance market, or could it for the insurance market?
Good question, and if you look at it, I mean, I've been in insurance supervision since 2007, and I think any conference always was about over-regulation. So I think, first of all, an industry signaling that there is too much regulation is I think, part of the dialogue. Is it different today? I think that is the question. And I think there were some differences that are directly linked to new risks. First of all, new risks. Sustainability risk was not on the agenda 5 years ago. Cyber risk not high on the agenda 5 years ago. Things like VIDA, ASAP, DORA, and so on were not on the agenda, and they often hit horizontally. So not only are there additional risks, they come with additional regulation, and they're often drafted in parts of Brussels that do not know insurance and regulations, which also requires additional coordination. Now, maybe it's, even if you would say that independently, looking at each of them, there is an argument to say it's necessary. If you look at everything together, it's a lot. And if you look at the effort or sometimes the difficulty to coordinate what is coming, then it can be overwhelming at some point, not only for industry, but also for supervisors. And we have a Solvency II review that we need to draft underlying rules for. We have IARD. We are at the same time doing DORA. We're still working on SFDR. And we are doing that with no additional resources. So I think both supervisors and industry do see that what has come is a lot. Is it too much? I try to look at that. And an example is the Solvency II reporting. We reviewed the Solvency II reporting. We reduced the data points that you need to report from 6,000 to 5,000. So there was a reduction of 1,000 data points, very concrete reduction of reporting requirements. And we published at the end of last year. Did that result in less reporting? Unfortunately not, because we added sustainability reporting, we added cyber reporting. So I think we are conscious of a need to be more, to focus really on what is necessary, but at the same time we need to focus on the new risks. And so I'm happy that I followed DJ in this round, because I think the signal coming from the Commission, at least at the moment, that in the new round we need to focus on first getting organized and implementing everything that was produced in the last 4 years, also as supervisors, and then enforcing it, putting it. I think that is essential.
Okay, thank you for that. Jacek, then, same question to you. Opening question about regulation.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I fully agree with what Petra just said. I can hardly remember a financial market conference without at least one panel on overregulation, and I can remember a couple of conferences that were dealing mostly with the question of overregulation, which means that probably this is a topic that's discussed back and forth. And I think there are several comments worth making, and some of the things I will be saying, I can imagine that they may not be very popular. I can even imagine that some of my colleagues will hate me for saying them, but I will do it anyway. So the first comment is, of course, that we have to understand that the area or the scope of regulation is expanding all the time. Petra mentioned new areas of activity, be it cybersecurity, be it other fields. We have to understand, and that's something that we have to factor in, that the more we want to regulate, the more regulation we have. So that's a very simple dependency. What puzzles me more is the way how we regulate, because the fact that we have an ever-expanding scope of regulation, that's probably true. It's also a simple consequence of the fact that our economy is becoming more complicated, with us being exposed to new sort of threats that haven't existed 20 or 50 years ago. We have to respond as the states, but the question is how we respond. And what I believe this is the most significant problem, or the most significant challenge, is that we respond with regulations that are drafted like manuals. So we have a very detailed set of regulations, very large body of regulation, be it at European level, be it at national level, which leads to a situation where, as one person said, that we don't see the forest because of the trees. So we have so many detailed rules that we are failing to understand the guiding principle that was originally the reason for coming up with them. And then, of course, the question is, why do we find ourselves in such a situation? And I can think of several explanations. One of my explanations is that we have some sort of a clash of expectations between the industry and let's say the public side, because on one hand, the industry would expect the rules to be very general, to be principle-based, not to be overly detailed, so as not to take the oxygen from the economy or from the industry. But on the other hand, they also expect a significant level of legal certainty and predictability of supervisory decision. And we need to find an equilibrium, because what we are seeing in our daily interactions with our entities, with our supervised entities, that if we are quite frequently asked to come up with specific guidance, to explain the way how we will apply certain sets of rules, but once we do it, then we are countered why do you want to regulate our business? This is dampening. You are taking the oxygen. So that's one I would say one reason for this tension. The other tension is, or the other reason for the tension is, that having principle-based rules is actually more demanding for all the players, because it's more demanding for the industry, because they need to make a judgment call how they implement them. It's also more demanding for the supervisors, because it's easier for a supervisor to have a manual to go to inspection having a manual, rather to go for inspection having only some set of principles, and then being expected to make a judgment decision about how business is being done, how products are being construed, how relations with customers are being handled, without having this, let's say, very detailed manual. Which means that even though all of us complain about the level of detail in the regulation, actually there may be some hypocrisy attached to it, because it also makes life easier, at least for some of them. So on one hand, we don't want to have these overly dampening regulations, but on the other hand, we feel safer having them. Because if we don't have them, we need to exercise our discretionary power, we need to take some risk, we need to be able to explain our decision, to defend them in court, to defend them in a public debate like this one, which means that I have a theory that there may be a component of hypocrisy related to this criticism against the detailed set of rules, because actually even though they may be detrimental to the economy, but at the same time they may be quite convenient for those who are expected to follow them, be it on the public side or be it on the private side. And then the question is how we should overcome this. So I'll be happy to follow up on this later in the panel, but that's a part of my diagnosis of this topic.
Okay, very good, excellent, thank you very much. Let's go back then again to the European Commission and to Didier. I'm going to ask you about competitiveness in a moment, but I'm curious about the plans for the next term and whether the Commission is going to really look at how the rules are being implemented in each country. Is that what the Commission is going to focus on for the next term? And if so, can you tell us a little bit more about those plans?
Thank you. First, I would like to say that I fully agree. The trade-off between legal certainty and flexibility is really at the center of the art of lawmaking, and it's very difficult to find the right balance, but I think it was very relevant. So the plans, I mean, it's too early to tell you the plans of the next Commission, because the next Commission does not exist. And by experience, I know that every time we say, now the time has come to do more enforcement and so on, but I really hope, and I think that the stars are really well aligned this time to be in a position to say that this is going to be the case, that we will stop, launching major reforms in the area of financial services in general, because we are concerned with insurance today, but the same criticism applies in the banking sector and in other sectors. Large reforms have been brought to the end under the last mandate, and now really the time has come to consolidate things, to see how we can simplify, help with the implementation, and make sure that the rules are properly transposed, implemented by the member states. And we know it's a challenge. We know we need to help them in that process, but also need to challenge them when necessary, when too many delays are there. So this is really our state of mind. I cannot tell you any precise plan today, because simply those plans do not exist. But again, it would make a lot of sense in my personal view.
Is there a danger that the plans could change considerably if a new commissioner comes in and goes in a different direction? I mean, that's always the case with a new college of commissioners, isn't it?
Let's remember where we were 5 years ago. Did we anticipate COVID? Did we anticipate the war, the Russian war? I mean, all the impact. But as I said this morning, let's also bear in mind that we have a well-functioning framework, and it has proven through those crises that it has a lot of advantages, providing for stability and solidity of the sector. So I think on that basis, again, we can say that there should not be too much cause for concerns of, overwhelming people with new rules under the next mandate, but new issues may arise. And I've mentioned this dialogue on the climate protection gap. Maybe this will lead us to wanting to introduce some targeted adjustments to the framework. Who knows? But we also know we have EIOPA, and EIOPA is doing a lot of work in terms of convergence, bringing people together. So often this sort of replaces legislation pretty well as well. So let's see.
Let's see. Okay, Petra, let's go to you then. So how do you strike a fair balance between supervision and the development of the insurance market? And how, in that same vein, do you ensure market security without reducing the EU's economic potential?
Yeah, and a question that has been on the agenda now for a while, is regulation an impediment to competitiveness of the EU? And I think, first of all, we have, I think, as DJ says, a strong market that is based on a framework for supervision that is worldwide recognized. I was in Washington last week. If you're in the World Bank, you don't know how many countries all want to talk about how they can move to Solvency II. Yes, we also are organizing a dialogue on an international capital standard, but let's be frank, everyone is currently following Solvency II. We are already on Solvency II. What did that do? It helped us through, I think, a whole bunch of crises that happened in the last couple of years. If you work, I mean, if I work as a supervisor now, but also at the European level, but also before, you are conscious of your market. You want your market to operate, and those who follow what I say when I go out there, I think often is supportive of the industry and the role they have as managing society's risks. At the same time, and I think this is a question back to the industry, when you say you want to be competitive, what is it you want to be? Is that competing with each other in 27 states, or is it being a strong single market that competes with the world? And I do hear some not always a concrete response here. And this is relevant, and I'm happy to share afterwards, because I now don't have her name ready, but there is an American-Finnish academic, a lady, who published a report recently where she did a study on the development of the American and the EU economy before 2018. Why? The digital economy, so the big tech. Why before 2018? Because till 2018, also EU was not regulating. So her rationale is, I take out regulation, I do it till 2018, and I look at how the markets are developing. And what you see is that US was booming in the innovative industry, and EU was not. And then she looks, what are the reasons? And the reason she identifies is the lack of venture capital, so capital markets union. It's the fact that it's not one country, it's 27 states with 27 different ways of doing things. And finally, it's making use of expertise from people from abroad that are immigrating into your country and making sure you get a lot of talent in. And for me, that was interesting. I'm not saying, and I just said that it would be good that the next Commission very seriously considers to focus on implementation. But at the same time, I do not feel that having a strong, robust market that has trust because of its framework in itself is an impediment to innovation. And I think we need to do both, but we need to do it thinking as a European market. And the reason I say that is this. If you have asked me 3 years ago, when I was in the Dutch Central Bank, I would probably have given a different answer. But the difference between me and the 27 other board members of EIOPA is that I only wear one hat. That's a privilege. I only wear a European hat, whereas all my board members wear 2 hats. They're responsible for the European position, but also their national position. And now, having had that hat for 3 years and looking at the European market, I truly start to see inefficiencies that are the result of the choice to lean to national. And that is a choice, and that is a choice for the political level. But it is a choice that has a cost. And I think that is something that, as a supervisor, I cannot solve. But if we really want to make progress on a competitiveness agenda in the world, we need that European skill.
Okay, well, let's go back from European to the national perspective and back to you, Jacek. Let's look at how the new regulations are affecting the practices of national supervisors. because we hear they're increasingly having to engage in level 1 and level 2 acts, which may ultimately affect their ability to carry out effective supervisory abilities and activities. Is there a danger that this will lead to a situation where the supervisor focuses on overseeing a lot of very detailed requirements and is less involved in market issues and in addressing those market issues?
It's a very fair point. So maybe just as a general comment, we are mainly the financial supervision authority, which means that our first task is supervision. Of course, we are also de facto and to some extent also the jure regulator. So I'm looking at Katarzyna Przewalska from the Ministry of Finance, because the Ministry of Finance is of course the lead regulator in the financial sector, but we embrace our role as also as a co-regulator or as a de facto regulator, be it through our participation in the legislative process, be it through our activity in connection with recommendations or other types of soft law that we issue. But we do not neglect our role as regulator, even though our primary responsibility is supervision. I will just share one thought of mine, maybe from the managerial perspective as the head of the Financial Supervision Authority. We as supervisors, having this dual mandate, or at least a partial mandate as regulator, we may be tempted to escape or to focus too largely on regulatory responses rather than supervisory responses, because this may appear an easier solution. Once you respond with a regulatory response, you may have the feeling that you have done something for the market, you have increased the safety, security of customers, you have provided some level of, let's say, value for customers, you are doing something good for the market, but what I want to avoid is that we miss the supervisory part. Because focusing too largely on the regulatory side may lead us to a false belief that we have solved the problem. While solving the problem, our primary mandate is to solve the problem on the supervisory side, exercising our supervisory powers. So, just to give you a simple parallel, in Poland we have a general speed limit of 50 in the cities, and we still have a number of tragic traffic accidents. So the question is, should we respond by lowering the speed limit to 30, or shall we respond by enforcing the 50 speed limit? So I believe that we as a Financial Supervision Authority, we are more in charge of enforcing the current speed limit rather than lowering the speed limit without thinking too much about the enforcement. And so that's the point I wanted to make about our role. We should be very careful in resorting to regulatory responses before exploring all options of making the financial system better using the available tools that are in our current mandate. Of course, this does require some bold approach, this does require some actions, does require taking some risks, but that's what we are paid for. So the message I want to make is that I strongly believe that we shouldn't be too easily tempted to go into regulatory responses without exploring options to react within the current regulatory framework, because the options, sometimes they are there, but it's just easier to go to the Ministry of Finance and propose some bill or propose some new set of regulations with a, let's say, a bit naive belief that this will make the world better without first exploring what's on the table. So that's some sort of a credo. And then on the second point, I'm fully with you. We should avoid a situation where both the supervisory teams, but also the business or compliance teams in the financial industry, where they be overly focused on ensuring compliance with a set of detailed formal rules, but they will fail to understand the business processes, or they will fail to understand the business risks or underlying the process that's going on. And that's also a challenge for us, for the financial supervisors. We have our inspections team, we have our current supervision team. I don't want them to be overburdened with tick-the-box exercises while conducting their inspection activity. I want them to dig into the nature of the problems that are there, of the business models that are there, and of the risks that may emerge in whatever, 1 year, 2 years, or 5 years.
Very good. Didier, that kind of brings me nicely back to you then. And when you hear about those potential dilemmas, you wonder then how much of an effect are they going to have on the EU insurance market and its competitiveness, particularly in a global perspective. So How well do you think the EU is doing in that sense then compared to other global markets? And is there a danger, as we've just been hearing, that those regulations will mean there's too much focus on the rules and regs and not enough in building up the businesses and making the insurance industry in Europe competitive or more competitive?
No, it's a fundamental question, and I think Petra said already quite a lot on this. The first key question, in my view, is, are we better off with the state-of-the-art complex legislation, Solvency II, which we have, or should we have something much more liberal, less harmonized, not helping the single market? For me, the answer is very clear. And when you, as Petra said, travel, when you have international discussions in the context of the IAS or in our bilateral relations, you see that Solvency II framework is really seen as being the thing to have, the way to regulate such an important sector as insurance, economic-based, risk-based. These are principles which are largely recognized as being necessary and useful. But of course, you still need to look at the quality of your legislation. And this is what we have tried to do with the review, adjusting some rules, making them prone to tackle the new risks out there. And also, the proportionality is very important. And I think we've tried to work very hard on that, avoiding that firms would be subject to Solvency II when this is not necessary, when they are too small, and when they are captured, and making sure that those that do not present major risk would be subject to lighter regime. So we try to integrate that cost-benefit analysis of legislation in our thinking. But it's important. And of course, I hear that very often from the industry. It's difficult for us. We are subject to a straitjacket, whereas our competitors are not. And that is why we are also working very hard together with EIOPA and other supervisory authorities to try and promote a global playing field in the area of insurance, that all those in competition would be subject to the same rules. And this is the very objective of the IAS standards, the hopefully to be adopted insurance capital standard, trying to build up a common level playing field with all the difficulties behind that, because it's not easy, and Petra knows very well the difficulties we have with our US partners in general. And in the EU we have that tool, but we also have another tool, and I will finish there. We also have the so-called equivalence framework, which allow us to consider that other countries' legislation are sort of basically similar to us, and therefore we can consider that we can do business with them. That is a strong incentive for those countries to join us and to bring up their rules as well. So we have tools, but it's not easy, and we have to be, I think competitiveness is going to be one. You were asking me about the next commission. Enforcement will be a theme, but competitiveness will also be one.
Sure, yes,
definitely.
Absolutely. And let's move on then from regulations to the retail investment strategy, something again that causes pain for some of those in the insurance industry. I'll start off again with you, Didier, because the IDD, the Insurance Distribution Directive, many will say was an example of minimum harmonization. However, those in the insurance industry say the draft RIS presented by the Commission seems to go beyond minimum harmonization. And for example, in the proposal to ban the payment of incentives, the Commission used the example of the Dutch and the English markets, even though the Commission's impact assessment showed clear differences in each market. So how do you balance the specific needs or conditions of the individual countries with the goals of achieving harmonization across the bloc?
Many questions in your questions, I have to say. First, maybe minimum versus maximum harmonization. I've never been a big fan of that distinction, to be honest. For me, legislation has to be to the point. So regulate what it needs to regulate and leave it when it's not necessary. So, yes, IDD is largely minimum, but there are some requirements nevertheless in there. So, in terms of investor protection in particular, or sort of supervision of the insurance distribution. So, I'm not sure this debate leads us very, very far. When we did the retail strategy, we wanted to have a horizontal approach, look at all types of investment products that would be in competition with each other. And clearly, the insurance sector is a provider of investment opportunities in the form of insurance-based investment products, IBIPs. So they had to be covered. And once you are covered, then you have to be to accept to be also subject to the new rules. Let's remember that this is one of the key capital market union proposals. So it's about creating a union, which has to respect sometimes some national specificities. But if you want to build up a single market or a union, you need to have common rules. Otherwise, I don't see how this would work. So we had to sort of include some adjustments of IDD into this, also with a view of, by the way, simplifying some of the requirements. So it goes both ways. And then last point maybe on what you said about the Dutch experience. I think it was indeed for us important to test this idea of a ban on inducement, which eventually was not fully included in the proposal, but showing that at least the one or two countries that have introduced such ban do not seem to be so behaving so badly. But of course, I know it's a difficult and complex discussions. The starting points are often, and that I have to acknowledge it, sometimes very different in terms of market structure, distribution structures between countries. So we had to acknowledge that because and I will conclude here, we did not want to disrupt markets, make revolutions, put people in unemployment just for the sake of harmonizing. That would have not been a wise thing to do.
Okay, well then, let's go and hear EIOPA's view on this, and Petra, because in EIOPA's advice for the Commission, you didn't indicate the necessity of banning incentives. So what is the official EIOPA view on this?
The official EIOPA view, in our opinion, was that we left it open.
You have to what?
We left it open.
Oh, you left it open.
We
okay.
gave the pros and the cons. Yeah. But this is what I said when the debate really started to get happening. Because, I mean, sometimes overregulation can also happen because of many, many interest groups all wanting something, and then everything being put into a law so that everyone sees something back in that law, and then I really wonder if that end product is workable. But at least everyone got a bit. That is also a way of deciding, but I really hope that we don't end up there with the retail investment strategy, but there is a risk, there is. I think what happened with the retail investment strategy is that it was nice process. I mean, we gave an advice as EIOPA, we waited a bit, no one was really worried. And then autumn, not last year, but the year before, the commissioner went out and said, ban. And this is where Europe industry exploded. This was huge, and there was major concerns. And that triggered, actually, with the commissioner and her team, the idea that if industry responds this loud, there must be something wrong there. We're on to something. And I think that in itself was also a balance, but maybe not a balance that was helpful at the time, because it gave very, very strong debates, and it ended up with the Commission's proposal, and I think we're still not there yet. At that time, I said the following. Yes, I come from a country where a ban was introduced. The time that ban was introduced, it was not a major change. It was for society. Society was fed up till here with insurance. And now, 15 years later, trust in insurance is still worried. The question, do you think you get value for money? In a country with a ban, 50% of the consumer says no. Still.
Okay.
It has to do with trust. And so whether or not you introduce a ban, it's a major overhaul. Do you want to do that in the absence of a major crisis? But if you do it, yes, you will solve some issues. You can show that. But you may introduce some new issues, and you may also not solve some problems. So I think in the core, what we want to solve is the fact that not all products in Europe are value for money. And do not tell me that that is not happening in your market. It's happening in every market. I have people from industry talking to me saying, yeah, Petra, but you know, you and I know which countries that are, and then they suggest some countries. They never suggest their own countries. Now, I'm bound to supervisory secrecy, so I can't say anything. But often the person I talk to actually has a problem in its own market as well that I'm aware of. So there are problems on value for money. It is necessary to understand where you stand. And for that reason, working on value for money in a comparison not only to your national market, because mind you, in the Netherlands, every insurer was doing it. So if you would have done a comparison, you would not have found an outlier, because they all did bad things. So what you need is, you need a comparison to peers that do operate under a different supervisor in a minimum harmonized regime. And then you need to have a discussion. And I fully agree with Jacek. It's the start of a dialogue. You get an indication of whether or not you have a concern, and then you need to have a good discussion to actually pinpoint the problem, and if it is a problem, get the change.
Okay, so Jacek, let's go to you then for your views on that. And what do you think should be the strategy for product value supervision, and what sort of supervisory actions do you think are necessary then?
Thank you very much. Actually, I like this question a lot, because it was in this very room that 5 years ago we announced our intention to conduct the product intervention in the unit-linked market. I believe this was a major achievement of the Polish financial supervision, and actually it's also a good experience or a good example how we should explore the options that are embedded in the law before resorting to the regulatory activity, because in this in the introductory statement from Mr. Dzop today, we've heard about a regulation regarding investment policies of insurance companies managing unit-linked products. So this was an area that was determined to be something which is beyond the scope of a potential product intervention, which is something that should be taken care of on a legislative, in a legislative way. However, what we could have done using our own powers, the product intervention, that's something what we have implemented, and this was exactly going back to the question of on value for money. So I believe this is something that should be within the core of our interest. The question is how we approach it. One way of approaching the question of value for money is the example of product intervention. We came to the conclusion that given the state of the Polish market, given where we are in terms of the state of play in our unit-linked market, this was the right thing to do. I believe that this was a significant achievement. It has shaped the market of unit-linked product in Poland. The other question is whether we should find solutions to the value for money question in our regulatory actions, or is it something that can be taken care of by the industry on their own with our support? And I believe the second way is a far better one.
This is self-regulation.
Self-regulation, yes. You know, in Poland, this is something that Grzegorz Plądzyński said in his introductory comments. We had 44 years of non-market economy in Poland, almost 45. We don't want to go back. We like the current setup much more, with the market being generally responsible for price formation and for commercial decision. But on the other hand, we also see, and this was also raised in the introductory comments by Grzegorz Plądzyński. It was also touched upon by my deputy Krystian Wielcioch. We see the insurance gap in the Polish market. So what do we do with the insurance gap? How do we respond to, let's say, unsatisfactory interest of customers in buying investment products? And it goes down to the pricing. It goes down to the value that the customers receive. We can, of course, be talking for hours about education, about some other panacea for insufficient level of interest in the capital markets or investment products. But basically, what the customer will be looking at is mostly the value that they are getting. So if you want to overcome the insurance gap, if you want to overcome the weaknesses of our capital markets, the only way to respond is deliver the value to the customers. And of course, it's far better when this value is delivered by the industry without a need from the regulator, without a need for the supervisor to show, let's say, the exact ratio, the exact split, or the exact pricing of the products. That's why we so much support all the self-regulation initiative, and we are happy to see them being implemented by the Polish insurance industry in cooperation with the banking sector. I think that's the best way to tackle it. But generally, probably we'll come back to this issue later on, because I know that maybe we'll have a chance to talk also about the insurance gap. But I can hardly imagine any other way of responding to the insurance gap or responding to the insufficient level of interest in capital markets or in long-term saving, other than delivering reasonable value to the customers.
Okay, well, let's go back to you then, Didier. On the same point, how do you think the RIS could increase the involvement of retail investors in the capital markets, especially given the proposed ban on commissions potentially coming into force?
I think the two guiding principles for us were trust, and I would say trust and transparency. And this is basically what has governed the proposals. Transparency of the way insurance distribution is organized and the way remuneration is organized, and to what extent the remuneration which distributors and insurance company get when selling a product actually eat up the return which the investor gets. And that's the basic issue, debate behind the discussion on the ban. And trust, and that is where I think the discussion on value for money is also fundamental, making sure indeed that we all work having in mind that the objective of this industry, the objective of investing in financial product is to provide for solutions for retail clients to build up a capital, to prepare for their old age, prepare for their pension. And for this, by entrusting their savings, we need to make sure that they get something in return. And the message we get from consumer representations, some experience which we have seen on the ground, show that unfortunately, and let's face it, this is not always happening. I'm not saying that the whole industry is ripping off consumer, that's not true. But there are cases, and not negligible ones, where there are problems, and these need to be addressed. So that's, I would say, the diagnostic, and I think we can all agree on that. The challenge of the retail strategy is on the how, and you mentioned the ban. The ban has provoked an incredible discussion, a storm, yes. Because inducements in some countries are really part of the DNA of the way products are being distributed. In those countries where you have a lot of tied agents, this is the way they are remunerated. So if we get rid of the inducement, you get rid of an industry of sometimes 10,000 or 100,000 of people from one day to another, and often an industry which is very much, embedded in local communities and so on. So having them gone in one day would probably not be a good idea. So we try to balance all those very different interests and come out with something that was not, that was something in middle. And let's see what the co-legislators made of it, by the way. And on value for money, we've also wanted to build up on what EIOPA has been doing already. I think Petra mentioned the work of EIOPA based on the current rules, and turn this into something really, let's say, like a fundamental feature of the framework, the fact that supervisory authorities should have access to data that allow them to compare some products and identify outliers, those who are really not doing a good job. And firms themselves would be, let's say, asked to also look at their product and make a cost benefit analysis based on what the others are doing and see whether what they're going to put on the market is really making sense. So these seem to be, let's say, based on common sense to a large extent, but the implementation, the perception is quite difficult, and this is reflected in the discussions which we are having now.
And just sticking with customer value then, Petra, back to you, because EIOPA launched a consultation on an EU-wide methodology for examining customer value. What does EIOPA want this methodology to look like? And in particular, how do you take into account local considerations, national perspectives as well?
Yeah, so the good thing here again is that if EIOPA does it, EIOPA is me and 27 supervisors who know their national market. So it's not some ivory tower in Europe. It starts on this idea of value for money. If you implement value for money well from the very start, I would say you can have tied agents, because it's not about the agents, it's about the product they sell, and that product is value for money. You don't need a best interest test because you already did your homework and you're selling value for money. So the starting point where you actually think, according to a product and oversight governance, how you will provide value for money at the moment that you manufacture and then distribute, I think is common sense. And so those who say, yeah, but if we need to start doing that, it's a lot of administrative burden, that is a very worrying answer for me, because that means you're not doing it today, and you should be doing that. Still, if you look at the average price of an insurance product, about 35% can be explained by the actual insurance product. The rest is distribution and asset management. And there, I do not always understand where the price comes from. So this is where you want to then go a step further. And this is a methodology we have developed. So we first developed already in 2020 value for money, and then we moved on, and we're now at the benchmarks that we consulted. We did not only consult, by the way, we also did a data exercise, and I thank everyone in EU industry that contributed to that. But in short, benchmarks, and you can read it in the consultation, it takes on board the specificities of the product that is sold to a consumer. It is not that we are looking for a certain market. We are looking for a consumer that buys a product with particular features. And we've set a list of criteria for those features. Is it a long-term product? Does it have a guarantee? Is it hybrid or unit linked? Does it include biometric risk? Does it have a guarantee, etc.? If it has all those features, then you can have a cluster. If you do it in that way, and if you leave out like the very small ranges, we expect to end up with a range of 70 clusters. Now again, an insurer that says, oh, but then I have to go every cluster and check if my product fits. I don't understand that. You should know the features of your product. If you know the features of your product, there's only one cluster that fits, and you can skip the others. So, but once you are in that cluster, my say is that you can then look at how is that priced, and if that product is sold, and it will never be sold in all 27s. There will be regions where consumers are interested in that product. If, for example, in Germany and Austria that product is sold, you can actually benchmark what are then the price, but what is also the cost, services, and returns. A price should always reflect cost, services, and returns, not just costs.
You could do that from any EU country, are you saying?
Yeah, I mean, because you look at the product. And then you have a range. Once you have the range, it could be that one country is within, some products are within the range, and some are outside of that range. That's where you have the discussion. Now, what if that country says, well, actually, Petra, this is Poland, and we have a tax on assets. So, yes, there is a slight difference, but we can explain that. That's a fair explanation. If you say, well, we're in the south of Spain, and we really have to sell through offices with real people because our population is not digital and doesn't want to be digital, that's an explanation. That is a service. I'm not looking for the parts where you can explain. I'm looking for the parts where I don't get it. Now, I think that makes common sense. And again, you can say, let's do that only national. But I really think that then as a market, you can run into a certain direction where you You don't notice that you're off because you're just together, where across the border, the same product is sold in a different way. The data pilot we did, and we will come out on that as well, because we're including also, does it work with the data? We have interesting findings, and one I can share. We asked all the participating insurers, can you let us know for the products that are involved, when does that product break even? And please use a rate of return of 1.8%. Most of the insurers did not fill it out, indicating that a rate of return of 1.8 is way too low. If you look at the last couple of years, it was 1. So that is interesting to me. And I think that is something where we need to have a discussion. And I go back to what you said, that's the start of a supervisory dialogue. But it's an informed start because you did do your homework as a supervisor and you have a basis to say you have a concern.
Okay, thank you very much, Petra. Very interesting. Jacek, I do want to move on to climate change and the green transition, but do you want to comment very quickly on what has been said?
I would like to briefly follow up on what Petra just said, and I will use a practical example, because some time ago the EIOPA published research related to CPI products, to the value for money in CPI products. And actually for us it was a very useful instrument, because not because of the fact that we would like to, to introduce by legislation, by regulation, by whatever, a certain price for a specific type of products, but because it has allowed us to identify the Polish market as to some extent an outlier in terms of value for money. And then the next steps were, okay, we appear to be an outlier in the European markets as far as CPI products value for money is concerned. Let us dig into the matter deeper to understand what are the reasons for us being the outlier. Because there may be some structural reasons related to, I don't know, tax system, customer preference, distribution channels, preference for online channels, on-site channels, whatever. But this has allowed us to enter into a discussion with the industry. And ultimately, last year, in this very room, the industry, the insurance industry, together with the banking industry, they arrived at some sort of a self-regulation initiative, which has allowed us to, at least to make an effort to bridge the gap between what we've seen in the other markets and what we've seen in the Polish market. Because once we are an outlier, we have to understand what are the reasons for it. And this may be an outlier in terms of the national market being an outlier. This may be outlier in terms of type of products, particular institutions, insurers, and so on. But this is the first step in entering into this discussion, trying to understand the reason for this divergence, and then once we understand what is the structure, what are the reasons for this or another value distribution between the product, the manufacturer, the distributor, and the customer, then we can try to find a solution. And as I said before, we have a very strong preference for solutions that are driven by the market players, with, of course, some support and assistance and the guiding let's say, some guidance from the supervisor.
Okay, we'll move on to our final topic, which is going to focus on climate change and the green transition and the challenges they pose for the regulators, for supervisors and industry. Didier, I'll go back to you, because the green transition seems to be one of the most challenging problems for the EU, and it's also impacting insurance activity. On the one hand, insurance companies say they would like to invest more in the green transition. On the other, they say overly restrictive regulations with severe penalties are in danger of discouraging financial institutions from pursuing a green transformation. That includes offering sustainable financial products. What do you think the regulations on greenwashing should look like?
Greenwashing is a very specific part of this big problem. I think we are working at the moment together with the EIOPA and other authorities to have some kind of a common concept of what greenwashing is and to turn this into legislation. But I think simply this is about avoiding that, people take the opportunity of the new concerns which many citizens have, that they would like their savings to go into useful investment. that this is actually the case, and that when you buy something which is called green, it is actually green. And there are cases already also there that show that some have used the opportunity of these new concerns to really sort of try to influence a little bit too much their customers. But yes, and overall, I mean, clearly, as I said, I think this morning, the transition towards a climate neutral economy is something for which the insurance industry can play a major role, and you cannot imagine how many solicitations you get from different people and stakeholders who had no clue about insurance in the past, about what it does not, coming now to ask them to put money where, I mean, it's true, by the way, for climate change, but it's true in other fields. Defense, for instance, now insurance should also be investing more in defense. But, and we're trying to incorporate that in our thinking, and I mentioned this morning Solvency II, the fact that we wanted to rebalance a bit the prudential requirements to make sure to release some investment capacity to fundamentally to invest in the green transition. We are also working with EIOPA on possible further incentives to do that in the form of reduced prudential requirements. So we are working on that, but it's not the only side of the coin for the insurers. I mean, they are investors, but they also are subject to climate change and climate risks on their activities, and also provider of solutions, because they are the one who are protecting our citizens by offering policies covering climate risk. So it's a multi-dimensional problem for the insurance sector.
And of course, in terms of more green policies coming down the road, again, a new commission, we don't know how they may change and how they may impact as well in terms of, you know, green risk, green issues in the future as well when it comes to the insurance industry. Petra, back to you then. The market consensus is that prudential regulation should be based on risk. Does EIOPA see the need to introduce, we'll say often, unrelated green supporting or brown punishing factors in all of this?
That's a good question, and I'm happy you ask it, because happy to comment. Do I feel that as a supervisor, I'm in the business of identifying green or penalizing brown activity? No, that's not my task. I'm a supervisor. I need my industry to look at risks. Do I see certain risks resulting from climate change that have an impact on insurers that they should take into consideration? Yes. I think that by now, and I think if you look at our advice in 2018, we based on data and evidence, we concluded there is still no appropriate reason to adjust capital requirements. Now it's 2024, it's 6 years later. We did the entire assessment again. We still conclude that for all asset classes except for the market risk module, equity and bonds invested in fossil. There we see that data confirms that there is a risk. Now, seriously, no one should fall off his or her chair when I say that. We're all in the business of managing risks. It cannot be a surprise that if you are invested and you are in a long-term business, that has an impact on your risk profile. It's very limited, but it is there. Now, how do we deal with that? Now, again, I'm not in favor of publicly showing green or brown as a supervisor. I'm in the business of making sure we take the right risks on board. And the only place to do that in Solvency II is in Pillar 1, in the market risk module, and then it is in, and then anyone asking us, is the insurance industry considering this risk? We say yes, and we move to all the other topics that DJ already indicated, that we also need to deal with. And I think where actually insurance can play a very positive role, sometimes in cooperation with governments, and that's dealing with the protection gap. I think it's manageable for our industry. I think it is important that they recognize the risk. I also think that if we do that properly without mentioning colors in Pillar 1, and then we continue to focus on dealing with protection gaps, because I think that really is a very important part for the insurance industry to focus on when it comes to climate change.
Okay, and finally, if I can go to you, Jacek, same issue really, but I think in Poland it seems some sectors of the economy certainly are transitioning towards a low carbon one. So from the perspective of a financial supervisor in Poland, where are the opportunities, do you think, in terms of that transition for the financial sector in Poland?
Well, I just shortly reiterate one of the comments that Petra made, where I agree very much that we should have an understanding how the climate risk or how the risk related to energy transformation, how does it translate into financial risk? Because what we've been taught, what we've been used to, is basically to manage financial risks and to supervise the management of financial risk. And that's actually that's a very valid question, a very valid point, to understand the transmission channels of the climate risk or of the fossil fuel risks or of the brown industry risk. How does it translate into real financial risks or the natural guardians of the way how this risk is being managed? So that I fully agree with. Moving back to the Polish economy, and just maybe in order to avoid complaining and talking about risks, I will focus more on the, let's say, opportunities part. And I refer to the last slide of Grzegorz Pędzyński's presentation. I haven't managed to take a picture, but if I recall correctly, there were 3 bullet points. One was climate, the second one was demography, and the third one was technology. So I perceived the combination of these first 2 as some sort of an opportunity, because what we see clearly in the market is that the new generation of customers, they may price differently the value of climate change or green energy related factors in their investment decisions, in their financial decisions. So if I were to name an opportunity which is related to how the Polish financial industry and the insurance industry in particular can adapt to the new challenges, but also benefit from the opportunities, is to combine these first 2 bullet points from your presentation, which is climate and demography, to approach the new generation of customers with a new proposition as far as the approach to climate change is concerned. And one maybe final comment, what I believe that we should be very careful that once we are talking about energy transformation, about the transition from the fossil fuel to renewable sources, nuclear energy, and so on, especially in the context of the Polish economy, we have to very carefully balance between talking about climate risks, about climate implications, and talking about energy independence, energy sovereignty. Because for me personally, the second part is at least equally important as the first part, given especially how dependent the Polish economy still is regarding the fossil fuels and our challenges or our, let's say, ambitions vis-a-vis nuclear energy and so on. So I believe that the second leg of the discussion on energy transformation is equally important as the first related to climate change.
Well, on that point, we will leave the discussion. I know these are issues that will come up again over the rest of today and no doubt tomorrow as well. But Didier, Petra and Jacek, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could show your appreciation for our wonderful panelists. And I'll hand back to Agatha.